You are a creator. You create your career, your business. You create a family. You create your future. On the Results Driven Life by Design broadcast, get ready to hear from people from all walks of life and how they overcame the odds to create a life led by purpose and vision. Here's your host, Kia Arian.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's broadcast. I always begin by reminding you that your skills, your experiences, and your talents have been given to you for a reason. No one else has that unique combination, and no one else has your voice. You have a message that the world needs to hear. And so as you listen to today's show, I invite you to a greater vision for your life that resonates beyond what you do, but why you do it. On today's show, I am very pleased to invite Lana Silk, who is the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Transform Iran. Their vision is in their name, and their mission is to show every Iranian man, woman, and child how deeply they are loved by God through Jesus Christ, and that this transformative love would penetrate, redeem, and renew all aspects of society across the nation of Iran. Now, as some of you know, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 turned Iran from a rich, thriving nation of smart, motivated, ambitious people into an authoritative dictatorship that used Islam to control, demoralize, and bankrupt the people and their country. This bankruptcy wasn't just material, but spiritual, emotional, and in many ways, physical through torture and abuse. I'm excited to talk to Lana and learn not just about the incredible work and the impact of Transform Iran, but about her journey and how this seemingly impossible vision unfolded and how she walks it out. Lana, welcome.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Same here. Now, Lana, I called this a seemingly impossible vision because of the intense persecution that exists against any religion, not just Christianity, but intensely against Christianity, any religion against Islam by the Iranian government. But somehow, Iran has the fastest growing underground church in Iran. And for people who aren't familiar with the political, religious, and spiritual landscape of Iran, can you explain to the listeners and tell us the role that Transform Iran has played in what's happening in Iran and what has happened?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with vision and what you see in the future and what you see as possible in the future. You know, when the Islamic government took over the country, there was a lot of hopelessness that immediately sprung up in terms of, oh my goodness, we are doomed. This is it. Our country is destroyed. And particularly then in those early years, as that really took root and the regime started to change the landscape of that country from the sort of how business was done, how education was done, how politics was done, then even more so people began to think it's over. Of course, I have a Christian lens to all of this, and I see God's hand in all of this, and I think, well, it's never over if God's got a different plan. And I do believe that God has a plan to bless and not to harm Iran and to really give Iranians a hope and a future. And so as believers in that country, and this predates me really, I was a child when all of that was happening, but my parents and their peers, their generation began to pray into and believe for and work towards a better future for Iran. And the birth of our nonprofit started with really a call of God on my parents' life, where he actually told them ahead what was coming in terms of how much worse it's going to get. He told them to leave the country, and he told them to prepare for what was going to be an underground church. And you talked about in your introduction there how Iran is the fastest growing church in the world today. And, you know, that is really credit to God. That's not the kind of thing that people can do. God is drawing people to himself and doing an amazing work in that country. And he foresaw the needs that would come with that kind of growth, a growth that has to be also kept secret, and a church that has to be, to some level, kept hidden. And he prepared my parents to serve that ahead of time. And so they came out in 1988 and began to collect together other Iranian Christians who had left the country. And again, it was about vision, passing on vision, let's see a different future for our country, and also let's see a different future for us in terms of the role that we will play in realizing the vision that we have for our country. And so it began very organically with people getting together, praying, discussing, strategizing, and it sort of gathered momentum to the point that it took on more and more structure and needed a name and all of that. And I'm really walking in the legacy of that.
So, you shared that this started with your father. Can you share a little bit more about his story and that he knew that things were going to get worse, and he came out 10 years after the revolution. So, what was happening in that 10 years, and kind of how did that all unfold for him?
Well, most of that time we were at war with Iraq. So we had almost my whole memory of Iran is that war and then the sort of regime in which we went to school and the sort of how we were educated in Iran, and then the sort of the propaganda, the murals, the calls to prayer, the whole sort of Islamic atmosphere around us.
Mhm.
My dad grew up as a second generation Christian. His father had a very dramatic supernatural encounter. He went on a 42-day fast and experienced God in a way that we Christians will dream about. And out of that came what were daily prayer meetings in their home for 4 years. My mum got saved through those meetings. And so my parents together have led very strongly for decades in the country in different capacities, taking the church into new spheres of influence, really. My dad registered the church with the government. He had business in Iran. He did business with the Shah's regime, and then he had business with the Islamic regime. He had a very successful electronics engineering firm, and he had some very high profile contracts that he won
Wow.
with the government, for the government, with other nations. So he's experienced both sides of that life in Iran, the business side, but also the church side, and leading a church through a huge change in the atmosphere from a freedom to repression under the government. And then God called them both out of the country before things became much more serious. And in fact, his best friend was martyred a few years after we left the country. So they've experienced that from a distance, the sort of the pain of living as Christians in Iran today. But God foresaw that they would be needed as visionaries and pioneers and people who have a real sort of business head in terms of, okay, what needs to happen here to really support this church? How do we communicate with them? Oh, you know what? The safest and easiest way is satellite TV. Let's launch a TV station. I mean, people were literally laughing at my dad when he came up with that idea that the Iranian church is going to need a Farsi language satellite TV Christian broadcast. But he went ahead and did it, pioneered it. And now, of course, many people are doing that, which is good. We need a lot of voices out there sharing the message. But the point being that when you're wired that way, then God has a different role for you to play, because he's able to communicate things with you ahead of time. And he's given you the brain and the inclination to put things in place that will prepare for what you have seen, to really make the most of the opportunities that are coming.
I love that. One of my core values, core beliefs, which is the topic of my book that's actually coming out, is that your business success, right? So a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurial business people, even the career people. And they go to work, they learn, they get their degrees, whatever it is that they're doing in their life. But what they're putting into their life is being used for a greater vision. If, like you said, they would open themselves up to that, right? What is the bigger thing? What is that impossible, almost delusional thing that in your case, your family will save a nation, will transform a nation that's in darkness and demoralization and truly, and I want to ask you a little bit about really the depth of what's going on. I don't think that people really understand, but how incredible that, your dad, with the skills that he had, the engineering, the business acumen that he had, he could have used it for, whatever he wanted to, but he started to build satellites and systems and other things. And you had shared with me on a previous conversation that he was building things before his time that became instrumental to do the work that you do to support these men and women and children who are trying to live a better life, who are trying to live freely and believe what they want to believe and do what they, and not be tortured for just having different thoughts and ideas than the government. I love that you shared that. What, besides the satellites, so your dad built satellites so that there can be safe communication for the church. Anything else? What else did he do that helped build the foundation of what Transform Iran is today?
So it really was about looking ahead to it's a needs-led initiative, isn't it? A good business is all about solving a problem. Like, what's the problem? What's the need? And what are we going to do to meet that need? And really everything that we've done as an organization and that's been spearheaded by my father and the team that he's built around him has been around that. So, for example, the church is isolated, it's disconnected. People cannot freely meet and worship. How do we create a sense of community? How do we bring the church together? Oh, okay, I know what we'll do. We'll use a tool, and ended up being Zoom, and we will have Zoom meetings, and we will just invite as many as want to come in. So this was many years, or several years at least, before COVID, when Zoom was not set up to be able to handle the kind of calls that it does today. I mean, we're recording this interview today on Zoom. It's taken on it. It's become our everyday. But when my parents saw the need, it was just this sort of niche tool that was happening. So they got hold of it, started using it, and started inviting isolated believers from all over the country to dial in and participate in meetings. And actually, through those meetings, all sorts of little issues came up with the way the system was able to cope with the kind of things we wanted to do with it. We were able to cooperate with the developers and have enhancements made that the entire world probably benefited from when COVID hit, and we were all using it. So it's, seeing, okay, what's needed? Well, we need to get together virtually. That wasn't something that was happening then. It's normal now. And so it was the precursor of what is now the digital church in Iran. We have 20 to 25,000 people every month connecting to meetings, praying together, worshiping together, and they're scattered all over the world, with the bulk being inside the country. And again, all the different areas of where we work, I think, well, that's what it's been. So we have a trauma counseling arm where we minister to the people who are victims of trauma and abuse and addiction. Well, that came out of the fact that we were doing really good Christian work and setting up churches and preaching the Christian message, but at the same time thinking, hang on, there are millions of people in Iran today who have mental health crisis happening, suicidal, people forced into prostitution. How do we practically help these people? How do we help them in a way that brings in an added layer of skill in terms of trauma counseling and help from addiction recovery? So we sent a team to be trained and learned the craft and established a ministry that meets those needs. And it goes on, 5 or 6 other examples about seeing what needs to happen. And then, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get to the result that we want? What are the steps that are needed to get there?
That's incredible. And that's right. And that was one thing that, as I was learning more about what you're doing and how you really are zooming in on what it is that the people need and using your skills, your talents, and what you've been given to make that happen. So you touched on this, that there's a lot of mental health issues, suicidal, prostitution. Can you share a little bit more about truly the darkness and the need that exists there, because it's such a closed off country? And I think it just shows how incredible your work is, because there are people who have these needs. Can you get a little bit more about what you see happening in Iran?
It's really devastating. What people are suffering in Iran today is, it breaks my heart constantly. It's the injustice of it and the hopelessness that comes with that. The Bible talks about how hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I think, the human race has an incredible amount of resilience and ability to overcome obstacles when there's hope. We have so many stories of people suffering in all kinds of circumstances all around the world, when there's always some kind of hope that you can get out of that. Maybe if you just get to a certain place or come across a certain person or connect to a certain organization, then maybe the circumstances can change. That drives an inner strength, and it allows that person to do formidable things in overcoming their situation. But when you start taking that hope away, then it's really, really hard. And I know Iranians are not unique to this. I know there'll be listeners today who either personally or will have know of people who have been in impossible situations when there really has felt like there's no way out. Well, those listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about. And Iranians, there's almost 90 million people in Iran today who were all caught up in this kind of hopelessness, because in many cases there is even at least is a kind of a possibility of at least leaving your geographical location. Let's go somewhere else where maybe the systems are different or the government is different. But Iranians don't even have that option because they are so vilified by the international sort of, by international opinion. And I'm not talking about governments here. I'm talking about regular people around the world who just look at Iran and see what the Iranian government is doing and the incredible amounts of pain and evil that are coming out of this government. And they just cover the entire population with that same label that Iranians are hateful, they're terrorists, they want to kill us, they want to bring pain to our countries and our cities. And all of that just gets put in one box. And now you imagine you're trapped in that box and you're trying to come out. That nobody wants you, and the governments don't want you because they are nervous about whether they're going to be letting in terrorists. And there's a reality. There are people in Iran who do want to do harm. So there's this difficulty. There's so many obstacles in getting out of this box that they're stuck in. And in that box, they have a government that doesn't care for them, doesn't care for their welfare. The really great example of it was the 12-day war in June with Israel, where we had two countries exchanging fire and damage done on both sides. And then you have a government in Israel that is then working to repair and to look after the people who've been hurt or dislocated. And then you have a government in Iran who is ignoring all of that. And Iran took greater damage in that, exchange, and instead is putting all of its energy, all of its resources into rearming, repositioning itself for round two, and attacking its own people in trying to weed out the people that it would call the dissidents, who made it possible for Israel to be so effective in what they did in June. So who are the people that ratted us out? Who are the people who are sympathetic to Israel? Who are the spies? And they've rounded up thousands of people. They've executed hundreds of people, even just since June, in dealing with this, in just creating an atmosphere of fear, of control, and saying basically, we are in charge. We are not deterred from our objective of wiping out Israel, and we will get all of you inside our own country who stand against us in this. So people are living in that atmosphere now. There's fear, and people are being stopped even on the streets. Hand over your cell phone. Which message groups are you part of? What's the last text message you sent? What photos have you been taking? Which websites have you been visiting? Like, they're just weeding people out all the time, and Christians are getting caught up in this too. Cars are being stopped on the streets and checked. Homes are being randomly inspected. So there is this fear and there's hopelessness because people feel that there's no way out. June sparked so much hope, to overuse a word. And we saw, you and I will have both seen all of the images that were coming out of Iran of people literally celebrating, welcoming in the bombs, sending messages of thanks personally to Netanyahu, saying, thank you, come and finish the job now. So much excitement that finally someone was going to help dislodge their wicked government. And then it fizzled out so quickly, and actually it made their situation worse because the government was still in position and just angry now and wanting to get to someone.
That breaks my heart too. I'm so sorry to hear that. Thank you for explaining that. Let me ask something that I think I hear a lot of sentiment from people who are not Iranian or not in Iran, and with everything that's going on around the world. And I want to hear what your response is to this. So we hear these things about the atrocities that go on, not just in Iran, but around the world, right? The Ukrainian war, Congo, everywhere. And what happens to people like us who are living very free lives, right? In the United States. our system goes on overload. Where like I can't hold that kind of pain and suffering and sorrow. But then in my mind, there's two directions. We have enough problems in our country, which is what I see a lot of. We have enough problems. Fix our own problems. I don't care what's going on. That's their problem. That's response one. We remove ourselves. But then there's another response. And, I'm not going to share that, but tell me what you would say to people who say, look, I can't, you know what? We've got our own problems. Deal with it. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think it's fair that it is a lot. I've heard the phrase compassion fatigue. People just get overwhelmed by it, and we do become desensitized as well because, I feel like as the generations go by, the degrees of horror that we face, that humans face, and that we get informed about, that we didn't maybe know about a generation ago, they just only seem to be increasing. So we do get a little desensitized, and something that might have outraged us 10 years ago is so normal now because it just happens everywhere. I'm very sympathetic to that. I would say, there's a Christian response to that, and I will bring that too. But even if we were to take that out of it, I would say, even just selfishly speaking, of all of the problems that we have around the world, the one in Iran is the one that does most directly impact us. Iran has very far-reaching tentacles, and Iran has made no secret of its desire practically for world domination, for Shia Islam. So I would say that unless the problem of Iran is fixed, that problem is going to come and knock on our door. We had issues when the war was happening in that region, and the Houthi were stopping the ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. And we had the talk this side of how, because of trade being impacted and ships not being able to get through, literally the price of our eggs was going up. So, there is definitely a ripple effect to what is happening over there, and it will impact us here. Sometimes in simple basic things like the price of our goods, but sometimes in much more serious things like the safety in our neighborhoods and in our country. There's no doubt about it that Iran has agents in the US right now, and they're very strategic. The Iranian government is the supreme leader, who's the ultimate authority, is a lifetime post. Imagine our US government, whichever one you want in place, imagine them with a lifetime post. We have a system of government here that limits their power to 4 years and potentially 8, but with a check in between to be voted back in. Imagine if those people could stay there for their whole lives. Think about what happens every time government changes in our system here, and how things that the new regime that's taken control disagree with, that are resetting and readdressing. Imagine what you could do if you didn't just have 4 years to play with, but you had 4 decades to play with, the kind of planning that can go into place. It's a different kind of power. And the Iranian regime since 1979 has only ever had 2 supreme leaders. Granted, the current one is very old and likely to be replaced soon. You're talking about 40 years of consistency with just 2 very on the same page kind of people leading this country. And then think about how they reach across, we had the axis of evil. Of course, that's been limited in a great way with the work that Israel's done. But Iran does not just stop there. They're reaching out. They've got China, Russia, Sudan. There's talk of what they're doing in South America. They are planning ahead, and they have announced that they want to take, Khomeini's words were, we will export this revolution to the ends of the earth. So they're not even trying to hide that. So it would be foolish of us to think that Iran's problem is a faraway problem that doesn't affect us. I would posit that it really does affect us. And the sooner that regime changes and the desires and the objectives of that country change, the better for all of us.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And I agree with you that they're like our mutual friend Human likes to say that if you stabilize Iran, you stabilize a whole region.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power and impact in that region, and Iran has had a history of having, like you said, people who are instigating
Yeah.
for reasons that power or control or religion, whatever it is, but there's a corruption there that goes deeper. You know, see, here's the other response to the. I love what you said, compassion fatigue. So
Yeah.
and so people just back off. I don't know where to go, and that's fair. But there is a level of compassion. I would say choose where you want to be compassionate in. Don't just back off and for reasons of saying that it's too big, too much, too deep, I can't hold it. Like that's not an excuse.
Mm.
And what I love to encourage people in is that yes, the vision ahead of you, the work, the depth of the, in this case, the sorrow, the demoralization, it feels too deep to make a dent, but one little ding can make another ding, can make another ding. Your father's story, your grandfather's story. It started with a 40-day fast, him, then his family, and look
Yeah.
what's happened. Would he could have said, "Who am I? I'm just one guy. I got a family. I don't even, you know what? It's too big for me." He did what he could with what he had, and look where it took. So yes, it feels big. Vision always feels big. The impact always feels impossible, but take the next step and look at how God uses and how God multiplies. And we say God multiplies, and whatever it is that people believe, the divine, the universe, life, how it multiplies and expands that. If you just take what you have and believe that even impacting one person is worth the effort, even that little bit of compassion.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say do one thing and do it well.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we get compassion fatigue is because we get all of this information and data and all of the different needs. And then we're just like, oh, I'll send $20 to this one and I'll say a prayer for that one. And we don't really feel like we're making a difference. And what leads to that fatigue, because we feel that we can't do anything about the problem. But if we choose a way to help, so a country, an organization, a specific kind of need, find someone that has feet on the ground with the problem that you're trying to solve and get behind them and empower them. We live in a very connected age today. And certainly for us as a nonprofit, we recognize that this is only going to happen through strategic teamwork. We have financial partners, we have prayer partners, and we have people who do it on the ground in Iran. And we're completely codependent. Our financial partners who are sitting maybe in a home in the US or in Europe and who have responded to this kind of call and gone, you know what, I want to do something about the problem in Iran. Well, they can't get to Iran. They maybe don't speak the language. They don't have the connections. They can't do anything about it in person, but they have $100 a month, $1,000 a month. They have means, but no access. We have all the access, but we need a way to pay for the things that we're trying to do. So I don't see either part of that equation as lesser. It is a codependent relationship, and it's such a life-giving, mutually blessed relationship where we can say to each other, I can do it, but I can't afford it. And this one saying, I can afford it, but I can't do it. Well, let's do it together. So I'd say, find that thing. There was a book I read years back called Holy Discontent, and it talks in there about the thing that really gets to you. And he talks in there about the Popeye moment. He talks about Popeye being this weak and dweeby guy who couldn't really do anything. You could constantly hassle him, abuse him, beat him up, and he would just have to take it. But you touch Olive, and Popeye somehow wakes up and he takes his spinach and suddenly he's super powerful. And the challenge was, what is your Popeye moment? What's that thing that riles you, that angers you, that gets under your skin, that you feel that you have to do something about this? Find that Popeye moment. Find someone who can empower you in getting something done, and fund it if that's all you can do, or get out there if you can volunteer, but just get behind a thing and do it well. And I think that will be very life-giving to us, but also it will take away that fatigue, because then we can feel that we're actually making a difference.
I love that. The Popeye moment. Find the thing. For me, it was, I think some of my listeners might know this. I grew up in the Farsi speaking Iranian church in the United States, in Washington, D.C. for 20 years, served there. And one of the things, I think that Popeye moment for me was, I grew up in the U.S. I lived a very good life. All the freedoms were afforded to me, education, everything that I ever wanted. But when I would go to church, I would see the women who had, many of them kind of, against life and death, came out of the country with one bag, if that, very limited means, resources. There were women who would come who were just beside themselves. Like they couldn't even, their eyes wouldn't even focus. They were so traumatized by what they went through in Iran. And they would end up in the US, and somehow someone said, there's a church, speaks your language, go there. And I would see these women, and not all of them were that way. Some of them were just lonely, and, maybe their husbands had kind of let them go. And the depth of compassion that I felt for them was, I couldn't leave it, because it was almost like looking at a starving woman when you had a feast in front of you, but they didn't know how to receive it. Right. So sometimes that level of that Popeye moment is the compassion that it doesn't have to be for a whole nation. It could be for that person that's in front of you.
Yeah.
And what do you have to give to them? Lana, tell me a little bit about, there's so many incredible stories, like supernatural, incredible things that happen every day. I know some of them, but tell me, and I know I'm asking you something impossible. What is the one that comes to mind that is like, look at what's happening in Iran, and maybe a life, a family, a person transformed? What's the one story that comes to mind you can share?
I kind of go through seasons with different ones that are just constantly on my mind, remembering them. But right now, the one that has been resurfacing over and over again is the story of the guy who leads our training for Bible translation in our ministry. He was I don't know if it was well, it was basically an alcoholic. He would say he wasn't necessarily addicted, but when he started drinking, there was no stopping. He would drink himself to a comatose state, and he would behave terribly. And his wife, and they'd had this whole fiery love affair, romantic sort of getting together, and crazy for each other. But she was getting ready to divorce him because she says how he would humiliate her so much. And our culture, it's a real culture of honor and shame, and his behavior was so awful every time he drank, which is whenever their families got together, that she was beginning to despise him. And it was that sort of setup. So, and also he was I don't know if it was an atheist, but he had basically decided that he didn't need any kind of God, because he was totally self-sufficient, and there was nothing any religion was offering him that he couldn't figure out for himself. This guy, he had 2 young children, and he decided that there was no future for his family in the country, and he wanted to leave. But we talked earlier about not being able to leave the country earlier. It was the same for him, and he had friends saying to him, the only way you're ever going to get out of this country is to pretend you're a Christian and that you're being persecuted and that your life is in danger. You need to get out. So he decided to prepare for an immigration interview to really pass the test, to convince the officers that he really was a Christian. And he got hold of a Bible and started reading it. And when he tells his story, and his video is on our website if anybody wants to go and watch it, because it's wonderful watching this sort of burly looking man, just the tenderness, in his eyes as he shares his story. And he talks about how he got to the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about love and forgiveness. And I mean, this is now decades on. He was telling me the story, and he was crying again. And he was saying, but these were words of love. These were words of forgiveness that I'd never heard words like this before. This was the thing that I was looking for, that I didn't even know that I was looking for. And so he ends up deciding to follow Jesus Christ. And he says in that exact moment, God just rooted out of him any kind of desire or propensity towards alcohol at all. And so that just was an overnight change. And remember, at this point, his wife basically hates him. And he starts talking to her about it. And he gives her the book and says, you got to read this book. It's going to change your life. And she recounts the story and says, well, for me, anything that he loved, I hated. So it was no way. I'm not interested. But then she began to see the evidence, the evidence of a life totally changed. His friends couldn't convince him to go and join these sort of drinking parties, to the point that finally he got so fed up of them constantly inviting him and trying to lure him that he said to his wife, let's go one more time, and I'm going to show them that I've changed. So they go to this event, and his friends started pouring him shots. They want to pour him two and a single for them. They're trying to get him drunk as quickly as possible so he can entertain them like he used to. And he felt the Holy Spirit say to him, you're fine, you go ahead and drink. So he picks up the shot glass to drink it. And, we heard the famous miracle that Jesus did in the Bible where he turned water into wine. Well, this is the reverse, where he turned the whiskey into water, because he literally went to drink this whiskey and it was water. And his friends would pour him doubles and pour themselves singles, and they were getting drunk, and he was drinking water and totally fine. And they were getting frustrated with him. And he was saying, you don't understand. God is doing a miracle here. He has saved me from this. This has no effect on me anymore. So eventually his wife becomes a Christian. Their children get saved, and they do finally leave the country. And as Christians, who need to escape. And he starts traveling back and forth to the country to minister to other alcoholics. And as a couple, they start ministering to people who have marriage difficulties, they have so much experience in this area. And he does this for many years. And the last trip that he goes on, before he goes, he has a little bit of a sense of premonition. And he says, as he was praying about it, he saw a room that he was standing in Iran. And the room had very sort of distinct green walls. And he could totally visualize himself in this room. And then he saw these fiery angels. He said they were 10 times taller than the height of that building. And they were standing guard around that room. And he knew that was a vision from God. And in his head, it was God telling him, you're fine. You can go. I'm going to protect you from any kind of exposure or arrest. So he goes, and he has a wonderful trip. And I mean, I don't want to take up our whole interview, but there were so many miracles, and some of them are shared on our site about different times that God intervened, down to somebody who happened to be repairing a TV connection in the home of a Revolutionary Guard officer who happened to be taking a phone call at that time, planning the arrest of this brother. And so then he was like, oh, I've overheard this conversation. You can't meet in that building. And, just miracle after miracle. And at the end of their trip, the last place that they're at, the building gets raided and he gets arrested. And so now he's confused. He's thinking, hang on, I had a vision. This doesn't work. They blindfold them when they arrest them in Iran, disorient them, and they took him to Evin prison. He was in solitary confinement. I mean, I don't even want to go into details of the horrible things they did to him. And when they took him to the room that they were going to hold him in, he's blindfolded the whole time. They took the blindfolds off, and it was the room that he had seen. And he immediately noticed, that distinct shade of green. And he realized that God had foreseen his arrest, and he had told him to take comfort because he was camping his angels around that room where he'd be held in solitary for a while. And the miracles then go on, the way God spoke to him in that room, the way God kept his sanity. And that's the biggest weapon of warfare there in solitary, is they're trying to make you go insane. And God just gave him these amazing tools. He tells a story one time of when they would use sirens to wake them up at different times, early hours in the morning, so they couldn't get sleep. And he was getting exhausted, and he asked God to help him just get one night's solid sleep. And God just deafened him, and he slept through all the sirens, and he ended up getting woken up at 9 a.m. to them banging the door, trying to get him his breakfast. He tells a story of one time when he couldn't sleep because his room was so bright, and that he was having to put a towel over his face to try to somehow shield his eyes from the brightness. And he called the guard in one time and said, can you please at least turn the lights off at night? And the guard looked at his room and said, what lights? And much down the road, when he gets freed and he's reunited with his wife, they compare notes, and she tells him that she had been praying because she had heard that there's no lighting. These cells are dingy and dark. And she had prayed that the Lord would supernaturally illuminate his jail cell. And so they're now laughing. He says, well, next time when you're praying, can you please decide which hours of the day? Because it was 24/7. It was too bright in the room. So, just the testimony of how God redeems a life, how the power of his word, the way he saved him from his addiction, the way he restored his marriage, and then the way he used him to minister to others and kept him safe in some incredible scenarios. And now he's using him to have the word of God translated into so many languages in Iran. And he says this is his favorite thing to do, because he talks about how the word saved him. And he wants to make sure that every person in Iran has access to that word and understands it. So that's one of the many.
What a beautiful story. And what I would say to listeners is that I talk a lot about vision and purpose because when we live in a life, especially when we live in such a rich country, the US, where we get so self-focused, and then we get into these funk, or we get into like depression, and so many people here are purposeless, missionless, visionless. And if they would just give, like, if what they've been given, they would impact what we said earlier, give to those around them, their life changes. Just like this testimony you shared, he took his alcoholism, even trying to do something in a lie, like, I'm going to pretend I'm a Christian, right?
Yeah.
Even that was all redeemed, right? The thing that was broken and false and toxic, it was redeemed to now give him such a beautiful purpose in his life and to impact. I'm sure he ministered to the prisoners. Now, look at what he's doing. So get out of ourselves, like that excuse of oh, I got we got our own problems, or it's too big for me. It's not. The door's open. And so I love that story and how really that illustrates that. Lana, one more question. I know we're getting to the end of our time. I can't believe we're getting to the end of our time. Like, this is the fastest interview that ever felt like. Well, there's two questions. It could be one and the same. But what was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome? And how did you overcome that? And what continues to test your resolve?
Good questions. I think for me, it's not been so much a challenge. The way I've lived my life has been very much God knows better. God sees tomorrow, let alone like the next, week and month and year. And so I've lived very dependent on his leading. And the times where it's been not so much a challenge, but a little confusing for me, I've allowed him to make decisions for me on what I should do, when I should do it, how I should do it. And that has really saved me from a lot of derailment in my sort of the purpose for my life. The challenges have always been the human side, where God has led me somewhere and it's not made sense and it's been difficult, and there's been a lot to overcome to just cope with the different scenarios. And I'll give you a couple examples. But it's not been a challenge in that sense, in that I've known God's in control and he's brought me here. So kind of it's actually his problem. So it's fine. I'd rather do what he's told me to do because he knows what I need. But it's still hard in the moment. So very specifically for me, it's been those big life altering decisions. So career path, I have always known that my heart is in Iran. My call is in Iran. I was born on Jomeh Siyar, which is the sort of significant day that predated that revolution that really brought in that new regime. And, every Iranian that was alive then will know that day. That was the day that took the greatest fatalities and casualties as Iranians fought and died to bring in an Islamic regime. And for whatever reason, God decided that I should be born on that day. And as soon as I was old enough to know, it stuck in me, like, why that day? And I remember saying to myself, and then as I had words, to saying to others people as well, if the day that I was born was so significant for Iran's story, then I want my whole life to be significant for Iran's story. And so I was on a track. I was gonna, marry an Iranian, do Iranian stuff, whatever. And God led me to this incredible Englishman that he confirmed to me with a prophetic vision was, the guy that I was falling in love with was God's choice for me. So it was good. Like, go ahead and marry him. And then he took me on this crazy path where I went to do marketing, worked in publishing. And it was like, what is happening here? And every step it was God's direction. Lord, what should I study? Where should I study it? What work should I take? And the doors that he was opening were confusing to me. And those were the challenges, why here? But okay, I trust you. And then he moved us across the country, and then he moved us across the world. And every time it was so hard. You leave your community behind, you're dislocated. And every time I've seen why God's done it in hindsight, like he's brought me across the right people and the right connections that he has needed for me to have to fulfill my call. And now, all these years on, he's brought me to do this job. And I think, wow, isn't God amazing? Because we have an organization full of incredible, talented, God-fearing, self-sacrificing people, but very few who understand business and management and communication. And he was training me, and I didn't even know that's what he was doing, and he was giving me these things to do and these things to study that for me were totally off the path for where I was supposed to be going. But he had seen the future, and because I was obedient in the moment and willing to listen, and even though it made zero sense to me, did the things he was asking me to do, I thank God for his grace that I'm now in a position now where I can do what I do, having been equipped to lead an organization like this, because he prepared me in his wisdom for this day. So those are the challenges, they're all in the moment. But if we live with vision, then the challenges aren't so bad, because they're pointing to something greater and they're getting us to our purpose.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And what I hear in that is that really the element of trust and surrender. And I think for people who are visionaries, who live by vision, that is hard, because we want to go there. We want to make it go and happen. But there's a freedom in stepping back, trusting that your path is exactly the way it should be, and looking at the moment and not looking at what you don't have, but looking at what's happening. And that's such a good reminder because it is walking and living according to a bigger vision that feels impossible can pull you down, but it's so important to stay focused on that. So what continues to test your resolve? Kind of staying within that, or anything you can share with us?
I don't know that my resolve gets tested so much. I'm so single-minded with the task that God has given me. We do have challenges to overcome that are on a sort of lower level, in terms of, when we have funding shortages, or when we have staffing shortages, or, what the government is trying to do to derail us. But I would say, if anything, those things actually strengthen our resolve as a team, and me for sure, because, if there's no opposition, then certainly if you're in the believing in the spiritual world and in sort of God's agenda and all this, then if the enemy, the devil, is not opposed to what we're trying to do, then we're off track. So I take heart that we're a threat to the kingdom of darkness. We're a threat to what evil powers are trying to do in Iran. And we have been gifted and positioned by God for such a time as this to make a real difference in our beautiful country. And I'm blessed with an organization where there really is such a strength of community, loyalty, the family feeling is strong, and that we really are for each other. There's no jostling for position, no egos. Everyone is just totally sold out for a transformed Iran, and is willing to do everything and anything to get to that purpose and cooperate together for us to get there together. So it's teamwork, and I have a great team around me.
Amen. Thank you. That was such a beautiful message. Beautiful message to wrap up our time. There's so many more questions I would love to ask you, but I love wrapping it up on this note that really we need each other, and everybody carries something. Everybody carries a magic, a power, the thing that God has put in them, so that we can help each other all rise and heal, and to live a life according to purpose. Because why? for the joy that he put before us.
Yeah.
There's a joy of living that it's just fun, Lana. Like life, God intended things to be joyful and fun. And so I know that feels kind of light and maybe Pollyanna, but it's not, because that's really what gives us life and lights us up and brings healing and gives other people hope, is the joy that's before us. You carry it beautifully. Thank you. I mean, it's not even like what God has put in you, the message that he's put in you. It's all the works that you're doing are incredible, but it's just who you are and when you show up and what you carry and what naturally, how you walk and where you walk is where heaven walks before you and behind you. And thank you for all that you're doing for Iran. God bless you in that. So tell the listeners, if they want to learn more, connect more, how can they do that?
We have a phenomenal website, transformiran.com. There's tons of information there if you want to go sort of down the learning rabbit trail. There's articles on the government, the political system, the education system, censorship, all sorts. So you can explore, just educate yourself on life in Iran. And then we have a section called Impact, and it shows stories like I shared with you, Sidrusa's story. And there's loads of other stories there of different lives that have been impacted by the work that we do together with our partners. And then there's a whole explanation of different activities that we're involved in. We talked a little bit about a few of them today together. So you can really get your teeth into it and learn what we do. And then we just invite you to help us. If you are a praying believer, then we believe and rely on the power of prayer. And there's a newsletter we send out once a month to really fuel prayer. We always say pray, but pray informed. Find out what's happening, find out what needs prayer, and really get engaged that way. And you can just sign up. It's a free monthly email. You'll get stories from the field, you get prayer points, and then you'll also get updates on how God is answering those prayers. So I really encourage you to sign up to that, whether you want to pray or you want to support in finance, because in both cases you'll get encouraged to see what God is doing with what you're investing in Iran. And of course, that is the last step, is to help us financially. We're a nonprofit. We're totally dependent on financial support. And there's so many things that we want to do where the only limiting factor is what we can afford in the moment. So have a look and see if you're inspired to help us in that way. We would greatly appreciate it.
That's wonderful. And we'll make those links available. Your website is incredible. The videos, your YouTube channel with the stories are really inspiring. And I think for people who the spiritual part of it may not be as compelling to them, just the way that you walk out and live out this vision of growth and building and problem solving and impacting lives in truly one of the most hostile environments is so instructive. So instructive. So I would encourage my listeners to just follow the work that you're doing and how this organization has been built, to be encouraged to do the same for wherever and whoever they're called to. So thank you so much, Lana. This was an incredible interview. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure my listeners enjoyed it as well. And thank you to all of the listeners who have tuned in. And again, my name is Kia Arian, reminding you once again that your skills, your talents, everything that you've been given for a reason. And there are people who stand to benefit from what you offer, and there are others who you're not called to help, and that's okay. Focus on the former group. They're waiting for you.
If you enjoyed this broadcast, subscribe to the show, connect with Kia on LinkedIn, and let her know what inspired you. This broadcast was brought to you by Zine, a marketing and brand development agency that helps attorneys, entrepreneurs, and professional service providers create raving clients who love them, stay with them, and tell others about them. Visit zinemarketing.com/newsletter to sign up and receive the Breathe Life newsletter, a print publication of Zine.